the 11th of April 1961, Jerusalem, Israel. Inside a converted community theatre called Beit Ha'am, 750 observers sit in complete silence. At the front of the room sits a man in a bulletproof glass booth. He wears glasses. He looks ordinary, almost forgettable. But this man is not ordinary. His name is Adolf Eichmann, and he is responsible for organizing the transportation of millions of Jews to their deaths during the Holocaust. For 16 years, he lived in hiding. For 16 years, he escaped justice. But now, finally, he sits in a courtroom, facing the survivors, facing the world, facing history. This is not just a trial. This is humanity's confrontation with one of the darkest chapters in human history. This is the story of how the world finally held Adolf Eichmann accountable. To understand the significance of this trial, you need to understand who Adolf Eichmann was. The bureaucrat of genocide, Adolf Eichmann was not a frontline soldier. He was not a concentration camp guard. He was something far more dangerous. A bureaucrat. As an SS officer, Eichmann was tasked with organizing the logistics of the final solution, Nazi Germany's plan to exterminate all Jews in Europe. He didn't personally kill anyone, but he made the killing possible. He organized the trains. He coordinated the deportations. He ensured that millions of Jews were efficiently transported from their homes to the death camps. Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor. Eichmann's trains delivered human beings to these factories of death. The Wannsee Conference. On the 20th of January 1942, Nazi leaders gathered at a villa in Wannsee, a suburb of Berlin, to discuss the final solution. Eichmann was there not as a leader, but as the recording secretary. He took the minutes. He documented the plan to murder 11 million Jews across Europe. The language was bureaucratic, euphemistic, clinical, evacuation, special treatment, resettlement. But everyone in that room knew what those words meant: mass murder on an industrial scale. Eichmann wasn't just a witness. He was a willing participant, an enabler, a key cog in the machinery of genocide. Hungary, 1944. By 1944, Germany was losing the war, but the Holocaust continued. In Hungary, where hundreds of thousands of Jews had survived, Eichmann personally supervised the deportations. Between May and July 1944, approximately 430,000 Hungarian Jews were transported to Auschwitz. Most were murdered within hours of arrival. Eichmann even made an offer to Joel Brand, a Jewish rescue activist: spare 1 million Jews in exchange for 10,000 trucks. The offer was never serious. It was a cruel negotiation tactic while the deportations continued. By the time the war ended in May 1945, approximately 6 million Jews had been murdered, and Adolf Eichmann's fingerprints were on much of the paperwork. When Nazi Germany collapsed in 1945, Eichmann knew he was a wanted man. Disappearing into obscurity, Eichmann was captured by American forces shortly after the war ended, but he didn't reveal his true identity. He used a false name and posed as a low-ranking Luftwaffe officer. Eventually, he escaped from custody and went into hiding in Germany. For 5 years, he worked odd jobs and stayed invisible. But by 1950, he knew that Nazi hunters were closing in, so he fled to Argentina. Life in Buenos Aires. In Argentina, Eichmann lived under the name Ricardo Clement. He worked at a Mercedes-Benz factory. He lived in a modest house on Garibaldi Street in a suburb of Buenos Aires. He remarried. His wife joined him from Germany. He had children. He blended into the large German immigrant community in Argentina. For a decade, he lived a quiet, ordinary life, but someone was watching. The network of evil Adolf Eichmann did not work alone. Behind him was a vast network of Nazi bureaucrats, SS officers, and collaborators, all contributing to the machinery of genocide. Reinhard Heydrich, the architect. If Eichmann was the logistics expert, Reinhard Heydrich was the architect. As head of the Reich Main Security Office, Heydrich chaired the Wannsee Conference and tasked Eichmann with implementing the final solution. Heydrich was assassinated by Czech resistance fighters in 1942, escaping earthly justice. But Eichmann survived the war and would face trial alone. Heinrich Himmler. The commander Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, oversaw the entire concentration camp system. Eichmann reported to Himmler's chain of command. Himmler committed suicide in May 1945, shortly after being captured by British forces. Again, Eichmann outlived his superiors. Other collaborators, countless others, participated. Camp commandants, train conductors, clerks who processed deportation orders. Some were tried at Nuremberg, others escaped or lived quietly after the war. But Eichmann's trial would be different. It would give survivors a voice. The hunt for Adolf Eichmann was not just an intelligence operation. It was a moral crusade. Simon Wiesenthal, the Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal, a Holocaust survivor, dedicated his life to tracking down Nazi war criminals. He documented crimes, gathered evidence, and lobbied governments to pursue justice. Though he was not directly involved in Eichmann's capture, his work inspired the global movement to hold Nazis accountable. The hunt begins. In 1957, a Holocaust survivor named Lothar Hermann, living in Argentina, received troubling information from his daughter, Sylvia. Sylvia had been dating a young man named Klaus Eichmann, Adolf Eichmann's son. Klaus had made comments suggesting his father had been an important Nazi officer. Hermann began investigating. He became convinced that Ricardo Clement was actually Adolf Eichmann. He contacted Fritz Bauer, the Jewish prosecutor general of the German state of Hessen. Bauer, fearing that official German channels might alert Eichmann or allow him to escape again, secretly passed the information to Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency. Lothar Hermann's determination. Lothar Hermann was blind, but his determination was unwavering. His daughter, Sylvia's relationship with Klaus Eichmann troubled him deeply. He spent months gathering details: Klaus's comments, the family's habits, the address on Garibaldi Street. Finally, he contacted Fritz Bauer in Germany, setting the wheels of justice in motion. Operation Finale Mossad began surveillance on the man living at the Garibaldi Street address. Confirming the identity, Mossad agents photographed Ricardo Clement and analyzed his features. They used ear analysis, a biometric identification technique, to compare the photos with wartime images of Eichmann. It was a match. Adolf Eichmann was alive, and he was living in Argentina. The abduction. In May 1960, Mossad dispatched a team of 11 operatives to Buenos Aires. The mission was led by Mossad chief Issa Harel, with the personal backing of Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion. The plan: kidnap Eichmann off the street, hold him in a safe house, and smuggle him out of Argentina on an El Al flight to Israel. The Mossad operatives risked their lives. Argentina had a significant Nazi expatriate community. If the operation failed, the agents could be killed. They surveilled Eichmann for weeks, confirming his identity through photographs and behavior patterns. On the 11th of May 1960, the team waited near Eichmann's home. When he stepped off a bus after work, they grabbed him. He struggled briefly, but the operatives overpowered him and forced him into a car. They took him to a safe house, where he was interrogated. After hours of questioning, Eichmann admitted his true identity and signed a document agreeing to stand trial in Israel. 11 days later, on the 22nd of May 1960, he was smuggled aboard an El Al airliner, disguised as an airline employee, and flown to Israel. Global reaction. The news that Israel had captured Adolf Eichmann sent shockwaves around the world. Argentina protested the violation of its sovereignty. Some international legal scholars questioned whether Israel had the right to try Eichmann. But Israel stood firm. Eichmann would face justice for crimes against the Jewish people. On the 11th of April 1961, the trial of Adolf Eichmann began in Jerusalem. The courtroom. The trial was held at Beit Ha'am, a community theatre converted into a courtroom capable of seating 750 observers. Eichmann sat in a bulletproof glass booth ostensibly for security, but also symbolically isolating him from humanity. 3 Israeli judges presided: Moshe Landau, presiding, Benjamin Halevi, and Yitzhak Raveh. The prosecution was led by Israeli Attorney General Gideon Hausner. The trial was broadcast on television and radio worldwide, the first major trial to receive such global coverage. The charges: Eichmann was charged with 15 counts under the Nazis and Nazi collaborators. Punishment. Law. Crimes against the Jewish people. Crimes against humanity. War crimes. He faced the death penalty. Gideon. Hausner's opening statement. On the 11th of April 1961, Israeli Attorney General Gideon Hausner stood before the court. "When I stand before you, judges of Israel, to lead the prosecution of Adolf Eichmann, I do not stand alone," he began. "With me here are 6 million accusers, but they cannot rise to their feet and point their finger at the man in the dock and cry, 'J accuse.' For their ashes were piled up in the hills of Auschwitz and in the fields of Treblinka." The courtroom fell silent. The weight of history filled the room. The evidence: the prosecution presented 1,600 documents, most bearing Eichmann's signature: train schedules, deportation orders, correspondence with concentration camp administrators. The 1C protocol, the minutes Eichmann himself had recorded, was introduced as evidence, demonstrating his intimate involvement in planning the Holocaust. But the most powerful evidence was not on paper. The witnesses. Over the course of the trial, 108 Holocaust survivors took the stand. They told their stories. They described the ghettos, the deportations, the camps, the gas chambers. Some witnesses had never spoken publicly about their experiences. For many, this was the first time the world truly heard what had happened. Zivia Lubetkin, a leader of the Jewish Combat Organization in Warsaw, described the starvation, the deportations, and the heroic but doomed uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1943. Yehiel Denur, an Auschwitz survivor, gave testimony so harrowing that he collapsed in the courtroom, a moment captured on camera and seared into public memory. Jankiel Viernik, a Treblinka survivor, described in horrifying detail how the camp operated, how trains arrived, how people were herded to the gas chambers, how the bodies were burned. Rivka Yoseluska survived a mass shooting in 1942. She testified that she, her family, and hundreds of others were marched to a pit. They were ordered to undress. Then the shooting began. She was hit but survived. She lay under corpses until night, then crawled out. Her entire family was murdered. Her testimony was so harrowing that the courtroom wept. Abba Kovner, a poet and resistance fighter from the Vilna ghetto, testified about Jewish resistance. He described the impossible choices: fight and die, or submit and die. He told the court about the partisans who fled to the forests and fought the Nazis with whatever weapons they could find. His testimony reminded the world, Jews were not passive victims. Many fought back. Rudolf Vrba escaped from Auschwitz in April 1944. He and fellow escapee Alfred Wetzler wrote the Vrba-Wetzler Report, one of the first detailed accounts of the Auschwitz gas chambers. Vrba testified about the selection process, the gas chambers disguised as showers, the crematoria. He described Eichmann's Hungarian deportations. In 1944, 430,000 Jews sent to Auschwitz in just 8 weeks. One witness, David Dublovinsky, described being lined up to be shot. An SS officer told him he would be Jew number 701. The officer kept a notebook recording how many Jews he had personally killed. Another witness testified about meeting Eichmann personally in Hungary in 1944 during the deportations. She described his cold efficiency, his indifference to human suffering. The testimony was overwhelming. The horror was undeniable. Eichmann's defense. Throughout the trial, Eichmann maintained the same defense. He was following orders. "I had nothing to do with killing Jews," he claimed. "I never killed a Jew, and I never ordered anyone to kill a Jew." He portrayed himself as a small cog in a vast machine, a bureaucrat who simply did his job. Eichmann testified in his own defense for weeks. He insisted he was a small cog who merely followed orders. But under cross-examination, inconsistencies emerged. He admitted he knew Jews were being killed. He admitted he had the power to slow deportations but chose not to. He admitted he was proud of his efficiency. The more he spoke, the more his guilt became undeniable. But the evidence showed otherwise. Eichmann had not been a passive participant. He had been enthusiastic, efficient, proud of his work. In Hungary, he had personally overseen the deportations, even as Germany was collapsing. He had negotiated cynically with Jewish leaders, offering false hope while continuing the killing. The prosecution dismantled his defense piece by piece. Defense lawyer Robert Servatius, Eichmann's defense attorney, German lawyer Robert Servatius, argued that Eichmann was prosecuted for acts of state that should not be judged by individual criminal law. He claimed Israel had no jurisdiction because the crimes occurred before Israel existed. The court rejected these arguments. Crimes against humanity transcend borders and time. On the 15th of December, 1961, after 8 months of testimony, the judges delivered their verdict. Guilty on all counts, Eichmann was found guilty on all 15 charges. The judges rejected his following orders: defense, citing the Nuremberg principles. Obeying an illegal order is not a valid excuse for committing crimes against humanity. Eichmann was sentenced to death. The appeal Eichmann appealed to the Israeli Supreme Court, which upheld the conviction and sentence. He then petitioned Israeli President Yitzhak Ben-Zvi for clemency. Eichmann in prison. After his conviction, Eichmann spent months in Ramla prison awaiting execution. Psychologists observed Eichmann during his imprisonment. He showed no remorse. He expressed loyalty to Nazi ideology. He wrote memoirs, still insisting he was merely following orders. To the end, he saw himself as a victim of circumstance. The clemency appeal, Eichmann's lawyers petitioned Israeli President Yitzhak Ben-Zvi for clemency. They argued that executing him would serve no purpose. Survivors and Holocaust organizations responded, "Justice demands accountability." President Ben-Zvi denied the petition. The execution. On the night of May 31, June 1, 1962, Adolf Eichmann was executed by hanging at Ramla prison. Just before midnight, Adolf Eichmann was led to the gallows. His last words were defiant: "Long live Germany. Long live Argentina. Long live Austria. These are the 3 countries with which I have been most connected and which I will not forget. I greet my wife, my family, and my friends. I am ready." In his final moments, he expressed his loyalty to Germany and Argentina. He showed no remorse. He was hanged at midnight. After his execution, his body was cremated and his ashes were scattered at sea, outside Israeli territorial waters. His ashes were scattered in international waters outside Israeli jurisdiction, ensuring no Nazi shrine could ever mark his remains. There would be no grave, no memorial, no place for future Nazis to venerate him. The Eichmann trial was more than a legal proceeding. It was a global reckoning. Giving survivors a voice for the first time, Holocaust survivors had a platform to tell their stories to the world. Before the Eichmann trial, many survivors had stayed silent. The trauma was too great. The world didn't want to hear. But in that Jerusalem courtroom, they spoke, and the world listened. Their testimonies educated a new generation. They ensured that the Holocaust would not be forgotten. Advancing international law. The trial raised important legal and ethical questions. Did Israel have the right to try Eichmann for crimes committed before Israel existed? Could a nation abduct a criminal from another country? Ultimately, jurists around the world, even those who initially questioned Israel's jurisdiction, concluded that the trial was conducted fairly and that the conviction was just. The trial reinforced the principle that crimes against humanity can be prosecuted anywhere, by any nation, regardless of where or when they were committed. The banality of evil philosopher Hannah Arendt, who covered the trial for The New Yorker, coined a famous phrase to describe Eichmann, the banality of evil. Eichmann was not a monster in appearance. He was ordinary, bureaucratic, obedient. And that, Arendt argued, was what made him so terrifying. The Holocaust was not carried out by sadistic psychopaths alone. It was carried out by ordinary people who chose to participate in an evil system. Eichmann's trial forced the world to confront an uncomfortable truth. Evil does not always look like evil. Sometimes it looks like a man in a suit, following orders, doing paperwork, continuing the hunt. The Eichmann trial was not the end of Nazi accountability. After Eichmann, Nazi hunters continued their work. In 1987, Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, was tried in France. In 2011, John Demjanjuk was convicted in Germany for assisting in murders at Sobibor. As of 2025, investigations continue, even as the remaining suspects are now in their 92nds or have died. Holocaust denial. The Eichmann trial helped combat Holocaust denial. The testimonies were broadcast globally. The evidence was overwhelming. Yet denial persists. The trial's legacy reminds us memory must be preserved. Modern genocide trials. The Eichmann trial influenced international law. It helped establish principles used in tribunals for Rwanda, Yugoslavia, and the International Criminal Court. The idea that perpetrators of genocide can be tried anywhere, by any nation, stems partly from Eichmann's trial. More than 60 years have passed since Adolf Eichmann was executed, but the questions his trial raised are still relevant today. What is justice? Can we ever truly achieve justice for crimes of such magnitude? Eichmann's execution did not bring back the 6 million murdered Jews. It did not undo the suffering. But it did something important. It affirmed that even decades later, even in hiding, even across continents, justice would find you. What is responsibility? Eichmann claimed he was just following orders. But the trial established that individuals are responsible for their actions, even in a totalitarian system. We cannot hide behind bureaucracy. We cannot claim we were powerless. If we participate in evil, we are accountable. What is memory? The Eichmann trial ensured that the Holocaust would not fade into history as just another atrocity. The survivors' testimonies educated the world. They forced humanity to confront the depth of Nazi crimes, and they reminded us we must never forget. Personal stories that survived. Behind the statistics, 6 million murdered are individual stories. The girl who survived. One witness testified about a young girl who survived a mass shooting by hiding under her mother's body. She crawled out at night and was taken in by a Polish family. After the war, she emigrated to Israel. She testified at Eichmann's trial. Her survival was a miracle. Her testimony was an act of defiance. The families who remember today, descendants of Holocaust survivors, keep their ancestors' memories alive. They tell their stories in schools, museums, documentaries. They remind us these were real people with real lives, stolen by hatred. The lesson we must never forget: Adolf Eichmann was executed in 1962, but the questions his trial raised remain urgent. How do ordinary people become complicit in evil? When do we have a duty to disobey immoral orders? How do we prevent genocides from happening again? The trial gave survivors a voice. It educated the world. It delivered justice. And it left us with a responsibility. Remember. Teach. Never again. The trial of Adolf Eichmann was not just about one man. It was about humanity confronting its darkest impulses. It was about survivors reclaiming their voices. It was about justice delayed but not denied. And it was about ensuring that the words "never again" mean something. We want to hear from you. Do you believe the Eichmann trial was fair? Should other countries have done more to capture Nazi war criminals? How do we ensure that genocides like the Holocaust never happen again? Do you have family members who survived the Holocaust or fought in World War II? Share their stories in the comments. If you believe these stories must be remembered, subscribe to Voices from WW2. We tell the human stories behind history's darkest and most important chapters.